On a cool autumn evening in the heart of the city, Daniel Kensington, a successful tech entrepreneur, sat in the corner of a high-end nightclub, a glass of whiskey in his hand and a look of quiet boredom in his eyes. His friends, a rowdy group of other wealthy businessmen, laughed and joked around the table, speaking in voices louder than necessary as they tried to outdo each other with stories of their latest exploits. The club was filled with the kind of people who were used to the finest things life had to offer: designer clothes, luxury cars, and exclusive parties. Everything was polished, pristine, and expected. Daniel was used to this world, but tonight, it felt empty to him. He scanned the room absent-mindedly, his attention drifting to the various conversations happening around him. But his eyes lingered for a moment on a young woman standing near the bar. She was leaning casually against the counter, chatting with the bartender. Her name was Anna, and she worked as a waitress at the McDonald's just down the street. Daniel had seen her there a few times when he had stopped by for coffee on his way to work, and even then, she had caught his attention. Anna wasn't like the other women in his life, those with flawless makeup, sharp heels, and an air of entitlement. Anna was simple, grounded. She wore a loose, faded uniform and had an unassuming smile that was refreshingly honest. There was nothing about her that seemed to belong in the polished, upper-class world Daniel navigated daily. And for some reason, that intrigued him. Daniel's friends, who had been growing increasingly loud, noticed where his gaze had landed. One of them, a loud, brash investor named Alex, nudged him in the side, grinning. "Hey, Daniel, don't tell me you've got your eye on a McDonald's girl?" Alex's voice carried across the table, loud enough for Anna to hear, and a ripple of laughter followed his words. Daniel, taken off guard, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He wasn't one to be made the butt of jokes, especially not in front of a woman like Anna, who barely seemed to register the fact that he was a millionaire. In fact, Daniel had often found it frustrating how little attention Anna paid to the lavish lifestyle he flaunted so effortlessly. She seemed to treat him like any other customer who came in for a coffee or snack, not like the wealthy businessman he was. To avoid further embarrassment, Daniel quickly responded with a half-hearted chuckle. "No, nothing like that. I was just thinking." He shrugged, the awkwardness of the moment leaving a sour taste in his mouth. But Alex, always eager to stir things up, wasn't ready to let it go. "Come on, Daniel. I bet you wouldn't even have the guts to talk to her. How much do you want to bet?" Daniel felt the pressure mounting. He was surrounded by people who loved a good dare, and his reputation among his friends was on the line. The idea of backing down was unthinkable. After all, what was the point of being a millionaire if you couldn't take risks every now and then? He glanced at Anna again, still engaged in conversation with the bartender, her expression calm and unaffected by the attention she had unwittingly drawn. There was something so refreshingly real about her, something that Daniel couldn't quite place, but at the same time, it made him uncomfortable. She was different from everyone he knew, and that intrigued him in a way that he couldn't quite explain. With a smirk, Daniel stood up from the table, his chair scraping against the polished floor. He wasn't going to let Alex, or anyone, think he lacked the courage to follow through on a challenge. "Fine," he said, his voice casual but tinged with a hint of defiance. "I'll marry her. On a dare." He shot Alex a challenging look, daring him to question his words. The table erupted in laughter, the sound filling the room. "You're joking, right?" Alex asked, clearly amused. "You'll marry a McDonald's waitress? For a laugh?" Daniel's smile widened. "You'll see," he said, the words leaving his mouth with surprising certainty. His mind raced with the possibilities. It was supposed to be a joke, an easy win to show his friends that he wasn't afraid of a silly dare. What harm could it possibly cause? After all, it wasn't like he was going to go through with anything serious. He would make it a show, a spectacle, and move on. His friends would laugh, Anna would probably play along, and it would all be over by the end of the night. As he made his way over to the bar, Daniel felt a mix of excitement and unease. He hadn't planned on this, but the idea of following through on something so out of the ordinary felt liberating. Anna turned slightly when he approached, her soft blue eyes meeting his. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Her gaze was unbothered, neutral, but it was clear she had recognized him. He had seen her in passing so many times, but this was different. This wasn't just a regular interaction. This was him stepping into her world, in a way he never had before. "Hi," Daniel said, his voice smooth but carrying an undercurrent of uncertainty. "I have a strange proposition for you." Anna raised an eyebrow, clearly not intimidated. "Oh? Do I want to hear it?" Daniel hesitated, momentarily struck by how unfazed she seemed. The other women he was used to were always waiting for their chance to be dazzled by his wealth or charm, but Anna was different. She didn't look like she was expecting anything from him. He found it oddly refreshing, but it also made him feel out of his element. "I was dared to marry you," Daniel said, trying to make his voice sound casual, but the words came out awkwardly. "It's a joke, obviously. Nothing serious." Anna blinked, processing the words for a moment. Then, a small, knowing smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "A dare?" she asked, amusement dancing in her eyes. "What makes you think I'd say yes to that?" Daniel, feeling both challenged and intrigued by her response, shrugged. "I don't know. I thought it might be fun to see what happens. You know, just a little excitement for the night." For a long moment, Anna studied him, her gaze steady and calculating. Daniel couldn't help but feel that she saw right through him, that she could sense the emptiness behind his extravagant life. It made him uneasy. But then, without a word, she nodded. "All right. I'll marry you." Her voice was calm, matter-of-fact, as though she had just agreed to run an errand. "But only if it's as silly as you make it sound." The words hit Daniel like a bolt of lightning. He hadn't expected her to agree so easily. And yet, there she was, agreeing to marry him on a dare, like it was the most casual thing in the world. The rest of the club was watching now, whispers passing between the patrons as the two of them stood in a small, surreal bubble of reality. Daniel's friends hooted and hollered, egging him on, but Anna remained composed, as if this was just another moment in her ordinary life. Later, Daniel would look back at this moment, the night his life was turned upside down, and wonder how it had all spiraled so quickly. How something that started as a laugh, a silly dare among friends, had led him to this point, married to a woman who, in that moment, was more than he could ever have imagined. But in the midst of it all, one thing became undeniably clear: for the first time in years, Daniel Kensington was genuinely, utterly intrigued. The days following Daniel's impulsive decision to marry Anna on a dare felt surreal. The world he knew, filled with business meetings, luxury cars, and designer suits, suddenly seemed far removed from the life he now found himself tied to. He had never imagined that a simple joke could lead to something so real. The wedding, a small affair arranged hastily, was nothing like the extravagant events Daniel had attended over the years. There were no grand banquets or sparkling chandeliers, no extravagant guest lists or multi-tiered cakes. Instead, there was a small gathering of Anna's family and a few of his friends, most of whom had come simply to witness the absurdity of the situation. As Anna stood beside him in the small, modest church, wearing a simple white dress that seemed out of place in the lavish world Daniel was accustomed to, he couldn't help but notice the contrast between them. She looked serene, calm, almost like she was in her element, while Daniel felt like an actor performing in a scene that had spiraled out of control. She wasn't trying to impress anyone or make a spectacle of the occasion. She was just herself. That was the first thing that struck Daniel, the fact that Anna wasn't playing by the same rules as everyone else. She wasn't concerned with status or appearances. She simply existed in the moment, and it was both fascinating and disorienting to Daniel. After the ceremony, as they left the church and made their way to his sleek black sports car, Daniel noticed the subtle tension between them. Anna hadn't once asked about the extravagant life he led, nor had she seemed interested in the trappings of wealth that defined his existence. When they arrived at his mansion, she didn't gasp in awe or express surprise at the opulence of the place. Instead, she quietly took in her surroundings, as if it were all just normal. He found that odd. He had been used to women reacting in awe to his success, to being enamored by the luxury he provided. But Anna wasn't impressed. If anything, she seemed uncomfortable in the lavish surroundings. It was as if she belonged to a completely different world, one he couldn't even begin to understand. The first few days after the wedding were awkward, to say the least. Daniel, always a man who had been accustomed to controlling every aspect of his life, found himself stumbling through a relationship he hadn't even wanted to begin with. Anna had moved into the mansion, but she kept to herself. She didn't ask for anything, not even the most basic comforts that most people would have sought in a new home. She didn't touch the extravagant furniture, the high-end electronics, or the endless collection of designer clothes he had bought for her. She seemed content with the simplest of things: a cup of coffee in the morning, a walk around the estate, a quiet evening with a book. She didn't need any of the things that Daniel thought defined happiness. As the days passed, Daniel found himself observing Anna more closely. He noticed her habits, the way she carried herself with such quiet confidence, her ability to move through life without the need for validation from anyone. One afternoon, as Daniel sat by the pool, checking emails on his phone, he saw Anna outside in the garden. She was crouched near a patch of roses, gently tending to the plants with a care that was almost tender. Her hands were covered in soil, her dress dirted at the hems, but she seemed completely at peace. It was a stark contrast to the manicured lawns and meticulously designed flower beds that surrounded her. She didn't care about perfection. She cared about something else entirely. It was in that moment that Daniel realized how little he knew about her. He had married her on a dare, yes, but beyond the surface, beyond the initial shock of their union, he hadn't taken the time to understand who she was or what she stood for. Anna wasn't like the women he was used to. She wasn't seeking validation through luxury or attention. She didn't need his money or his status. That realization stung. What was she doing with him, then? And why was he so captivated by her, despite the fact that everything about their marriage had started as a joke? It wasn't long before Daniel's curiosity began to gnaw at him. He tried to engage Anna in conversation, but she was always polite, always measured. She never pushed him away, but she didn't open up either. They would talk about the weather, or her garden, or the little things she enjoyed doing around the house. But every time he tried to ask her about herself, about her past, about who she was before she became his wife, she would deflect the question with a soft smile or a change of subject. She didn't seem to be hiding anything, but she wasn't offering anything either. And that made Daniel more intrigued than ever. One evening, after a quiet dinner at home, Daniel sat on the couch, nursing a glass of wine. The silence between them was comfortable, but it also felt heavy with unspoken words. He looked over at Anna, who was sitting on the other side of the room, flipping through a book. She didn't seem to notice him watching her, but Daniel couldn't help but feel a growing sense of disconnection. She was so unlike anyone he had ever known, so different from the women he had dated in the past. He realized that he didn't even know what her dreams were, what motivated her, or what had led her to this point in her life. "Anna," he finally said, breaking the silence. "Can I ask you something?" She looked up from her book, her blue eyes meeting his. "Of course. What made you agree to this?" Daniel's voice was quiet, his words careful. "I mean, I get that it was a dare, but why did you say yes?" Anna closed the book and set it aside, folding her hands in her lap. For a long moment, she didn't answer, her gaze drifting toward the large windows that overlooked the estate. She seemed to be thinking about something, processing his question before responding. "I guess I thought it would be an adventure," she said finally, her voice soft but steady. "And I didn't have much else going on." Daniel was taken aback by her response. "What do you mean?" He sat up straighter, leaning forward. "You didn't have anything else going on?" Anna shrugged slightly. "No, not really. I've been working at McDonald's, and I've been saving up, trying to figure out what I want to do with my life. But I've been stuck. Stuck in a cycle. This was something different. Something unexpected. Maybe I just needed to shake things up." Daniel stared at her, his mind racing. She wasn't what he had expected. She wasn't some ambitious gold digger looking to marry a rich man for his money or fame. She was just lost, like so many people in the world. She wasn't looking for a way out of her ordinary life, she was simply trying to find something more meaningful. He had married her on a dare, but now, he was beginning to wonder if their paths had crossed for a reason. But even as the connection between them deepened, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. There was a quiet mystery to Anna, something she wasn't sharing with him. She was constantly looking at the world with a sense of detachment, as if she was seeing things from a different perspective, one that he couldn't even begin to understand. And every time he asked her about her past, she would change the subject. It was as though there was something hidden behind those bright eyes of hers, something she wasn't ready to share. It was in the stillness of those moments, when the world seemed to slow down around them, that Daniel felt the weight of his own decisions. This wasn't just some silly joke anymore. Anna was no longer the punchline of a dare. She was a real person, someone with her own story, her own struggles. And slowly, Daniel realized that this impulsive marriage might be the most important thing that had ever happened to him. As he looked at her that night, sitting across the room with that quiet, knowing smile, he couldn't help but wonder, who was she really? What had led her to this point in her life? And more importantly, why did he feel like everything he thought he knew about love, about relationships, was being turned upside down? It was a question he couldn't answer, at least, not yet. But one thing was certain, Anna was no ordinary woman, and this marriage, born from a dare, was far from ordinary. Daniel's world, which had once seemed so secure and predictable, was now unrecognizable. And he didn't know what to do about it. The weeks that followed felt like a strange blend of ordinary life and surreal experiences for Daniel. He had married Anna on a dare, an impulsive decision that had seemed like just another joke to entertain his friends. But with each passing day, the marriage became less of a joke and more of an uncharted territory that Daniel found himself unwillingly navigating. It wasn't just the awkwardness of the situation that left him unsettled, it was the growing realization that Anna wasn't like anyone he had ever known. The more time he spent with her, the more he discovered that her world was fundamentally different from his. One evening, after a long day at the office, Daniel returned to the mansion and was greeted by the familiar silence. The grandiose hallways, the marble floors, the endless rows of high-end art, none of it seemed to matter to Anna. It had become clear that, for her, the mansion was just a place to stay, not a symbol of status or success. He had often wondered why she had agreed to this marriage in the first place. When they first spoke, she had told him she was stuck in a cycle, searching for something more meaningful, but Daniel hadn't fully grasped the depth of her words. It wasn't until one evening, when they sat on the patio overlooking the vast estate, that Anna finally began to open up. It was an unusually warm evening for fall, the sun setting behind the rolling hills, casting the entire landscape in a golden hue. Daniel sat next to her, a glass of whiskey in hand, but for the first time in weeks, he wasn't focused on the luxury of his surroundings. He was focused on her. Anna had been quieter than usual, sitting with her knees pulled up to her chest as she gazed out into the distance, lost in thought. Her silence was something Daniel had learned to expect, but tonight, it felt different. It felt like she was carrying something that had yet to be revealed. "So, what now?" Daniel asked, breaking the silence. His voice was casual, but there was an underlying curiosity that he couldn't shake. "I mean, this whole thing," he gestured to the mansion around them, "it's not exactly what you signed up for, is it?" Anna shifted slightly, her gaze still focused on the horizon. For a moment, it seemed as if she hadn't heard him. But then, she turned her head toward him, her expression calm yet full of depth. "No, it's not," she replied softly. "But I've never really been someone who's wanted to be part of a world like yours, Daniel. I just wanted to see what was out there, to see if there was more to life than just getting by." Daniel was taken aback. This wasn't what he had expected. He had assumed Anna would be thrilled with the sudden change in her circumstances, the luxury, the fine dining, the freedom that came with wealth. But she wasn't impressed by any of it. It was as though she had already figured out something that Daniel had spent years trying to understand. That all the things he thought were important, money, status, power, didn't define a meaningful life. For Anna, the life she had before the dare was the life she wanted, a simple existence far removed from the high society games Daniel played. "Why did you say yes, then?" Daniel asked, the question hanging in the air like a weight. "You didn't have to marry me. You didn't have to go through with any of this." Anna's eyes softened, and she exhaled slowly, as if she had been holding her breath for a long time. "Because, Daniel, I needed to feel something different. I needed to break out of my own routine. Maybe I didn't know what I was getting into, but I knew I had to step out of my own world for once. I was tired of living a life that felt small." Daniel stared at her, processing her words. His mind was racing, trying to reconcile what he had known about the world with what Anna was telling him. He had spent his entire life building his empire, surrounding himself with wealth and luxury, thinking that success was the ultimate goal. But now, sitting next to Anna, he was beginning to question everything he had taken for granted. Her honesty was unsettling. She wasn't seeking his wealth or his status, she wasn't after the things that people like him spent their lives pursuing. She just wanted to live. She just wanted to feel free. The conversation drifted into silence again, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was as though a veil had been lifted, and Daniel was beginning to see Anna in a new light. She wasn't just the woman who had agreed to marry him on a dare. She was a person with her own desires, her own dreams, and a quiet strength that Daniel couldn't quite put his finger on. And yet, he still didn't understand her fully. There were pieces of her life that she hadn't shared, parts of her past that remained locked away. But he could sense that she wasn't ready to reveal them. Over the next few weeks, their interactions became less strained, though still awkward at times. They spent more time together, sharing meals, talking about their days, and slowly starting to form a routine. Daniel found himself intrigued by Anna's ability to find contentment in the simplest things. She didn't need a designer handbag or the latest car model to be happy. She was content with a cup of tea on the porch or a walk through the garden. It was a stark contrast to his own life, where every minute was accounted for, every action motivated by a desire to achieve something greater, something more. But it wasn't just Anna's simplicity that captivated him. It was the way she carried herself with such quiet confidence, as if she knew something about the world that Daniel didn't. There was a calmness about her, a peace that seemed to emanate from within. It wasn't that she didn't care about anything, it was that she cared about different things. She wasn't focused on accumulating wealth or prestige. She didn't care about impressing anyone. All she seemed to want was peace and meaning, and Daniel realized that he had been missing that in his own life. One evening, after another long day of meetings and conference calls, Daniel returned to the mansion and found Anna in the garden, tending to the flowers again. It had become one of her favorite pastimes, a form of therapy for her that allowed her to disconnect from everything around her. Daniel watched her for a moment, admiring the way she moved so effortlessly through the rows of plants, her fingers gently brushing against the petals. It was as though she belonged to the earth itself, a part of something much larger than the luxury that surrounded him. He approached her cautiously, unsure of how to continue the conversation. But when Anna looked up and saw him standing there, she smiled and gestured for him to join her. "You should try it," she said, her voice soft. "It's peaceful out here." Daniel hesitated for a moment, but then decided to join her. He knelt down beside her, unsure of what to do next. Anna handed him a small trowel and pointed to a patch of soil that needed attention. "Just loosen the soil," she explained, "and then we can plant these." As they worked together in silence, Daniel felt an odd sense of calm. It wasn't like the chaos of his business life, the pressure to always be on top, to always be striving for more. This was different. This was simple. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt as though he could breathe. It was in that moment, as they sat side by side in the garden, that Daniel realized something profound. Anna hadn't just changed his perception of love or relationships, she had changed his perception of life itself. She had shown him that there was more to existence than the constant pursuit of success. There was value in the quiet moments, in the simplicity of life. And even though he still didn't fully understand her, Daniel knew that he was beginning to understand himself in a way that he never had before. But as the days passed, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Anna's story than she was letting on. He knew there was something in her past that she hadn't shared, something that haunted her. And he couldn't help but wonder, would she ever open up? Would he ever truly know who she was? Or would the mystery of Anna always remain just beyond his reach? For the first time in his life, Daniel found himself questioning everything, his wealth, his achievements, and his understanding of what truly mattered. The more he tried to understand Anna, the more he realized that perhaps it wasn't about understanding her at all. Maybe, just maybe, it was about learning to accept her, and in doing as the weeks turned into months, Daniel's life continued to shift in ways he couldn't have anticipated. What had begun as an absurd and impulsive marriage on a dare was gradually evolving into something deeper, something he wasn't sure how to define. It was impossible for him to ignore the changes that Anna was bringing to his life, nor the unsettling realization that he was beginning to feel something for her that he hadn't expected, a bond, a connection, and maybe even affection. He hadn't planned for any of this. He had expected this marriage to fizzle out after a few weeks, but here he was, more tangled in the web of his own emotions than ever before. Anna, for her part, remained as enigmatic as ever. She was a puzzle that Daniel couldn't quite solve. Every time he thought he had her figured out, another layer of complexity would reveal itself. She had a way of holding back, of never fully opening up to him, and that frustrated Daniel. It wasn't that she was distant, no, she was kind, thoughtful, and patient with him, but there was always a barrier, a quiet space between them where the truth seemed to be hidden. The more he tried to learn about her, the more elusive she became. One evening, as they sat in the living room of the mansion, a rare moment of shared stillness between them, Daniel decided to confront her. He had to know what was holding her back. It had been long enough now, he had given her time, space, and patience. But something deep inside told him that the woman sitting beside him, the one who had so effortlessly changed his perspective on life, was hiding something significant, something that, once revealed, could change everything between them. "Anna," Daniel began, his voice steady but carrying a weight of sincerity. She looked up from the book she was reading, her deep blue eyes meeting his with a softness that made his heart beat faster. He hesitated for a moment, trying to find the right words. "I know you've been through a lot. I know you're not ready to talk about your past, but I need to understand something, so, learning to accept himself." She set the book down, her expression unreadable. It was the first time in a long while that Daniel saw her completely still, no gentle smile, no easy conversation. Just quiet focus, as though she was preparing for something. He leaned forward slightly, sensing that this conversation would be different from all the others. What happened to you, Anna? His words were gentle but carried a sincerity he could no longer hide. I don't know everything about your life before we met. I know you've had your share of struggles, but I can't keep guessing. I want to understand you. I need to know what made you who you are. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood up slowly, walking over to the large window that overlooked the estate. For a moment, Daniel thought she might leave the conversation altogether, but she didn't. She simply stood there, her back to him, staring out into the vast emptiness of the night, her hands tucked into the sleeves of her sweater. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy, and Daniel wondered if he had pushed too far. But then, slowly, she turned back to face him, and her eyes were filled with something he hadn't expected, something raw, something vulnerable. I wasn't always this calm, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. This was the first time she had allowed herself to open up like this. He stayed silent, listening intently, his gaze fixed on her as she spoke. I grew up in a small town. My family didn't have much. My mom worked 2 jobs, and my dad, well, he wasn't really around. I learned early on that you don't get to complain. You just keep going, keep working, keep surviving. My mom always said that life doesn't care about your struggles, it just keeps moving forward. Anna paused, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of the windowpane. I was a quiet kid. I stayed out of trouble, worked hard, and tried to make life easier for my mom. But when I turned 16, things got even harder. My mom lost her job, and I had to start working to help out. That's when I ended up at McDonald's. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a paycheck. And in my world, that's what mattered. Daniel listened intently, realizing that this wasn't just a story of hardship, it was a story of survival. Anna hadn't lived a life of privilege, and everything she had done, every decision she had made, had been to get by. There had been no room for dreams or ambitions in her world, only the cold reality of making ends meet. I didn't have the time to think about what I wanted. I didn't have the luxury of asking myself what I wanted to be or where I wanted to go. I just worked. Every day. For years. Her voice cracked slightly as she continued. And then, one day, everything changed. I got pregnant. It wasn't planned. I wasn't ready for it. But it happened. And suddenly, the life I was trying to hold together felt like it was slipping through my fingers. Daniel's chest tightened as he listened. This wasn't what he had expected to hear. He had always assumed that Anna had led an uncomplicated life before their marriage, a life that had only become more difficult because of their bizarre union. But now, listening to her, he realized that she had been through things he couldn't even fathom. And she hadn't shared any of it with him until now. I made the decision to keep the baby, she continued, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. But that meant giving up on everything. I had to leave school, give up my dreams of anything more than the life I had. And for a while, I was okay with it. I convinced myself that this was my life, that I had to make the best of it. But somewhere along the way, I started to feel like I was suffocating. I couldn't breathe, Daniel. I was trapped in a cycle I didn't know how to break. Daniel felt a deep ache in his chest as he listened to her story. He had never known the kind of struggle she had faced, the kind of quiet pain that simmered beneath the surface of her calm exterior. The woman who had seemed so serene, so composed, had once been lost in a world that had demanded everything from her without ever offering anything in return. But I couldn't stay there forever, Anna continued, her voice stronger now, but with a note of sadness. I had to do something different. And that's when I agreed to the dare. I didn't know what it would lead to, but I knew I had to break out of the life I was living. I didn't know you, Daniel. I didn't know anything about your world. But I was desperate for something new. I was desperate to feel something different, something more. Daniel sat in stunned silence, his mind racing as he processed the depth of her words. He had never imagined that Anna's decision to marry him had been anything more than an impulse, a momentary escape from a life she had grown tired of. But now he understood. She hadn't married him for the money, for the lifestyle, or even for the adventure. She had married him because, for once, she wanted to make a choice, her choice. "I never thought it would go this far," Anna finished, her voice softer now, almost as if she were talking to herself. "I didn't think I would end up staying here with you. I thought it would be a way to shake things up, to give myself something to hold on to. But now I'm not sure what I want anymore." Daniel stood up and walked over to her, his heart heavy with empathy for her struggles. He reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder, a simple gesture that seemed to hold the weight of everything that had passed between them. Anna turned to face him, her eyes searching his, as if waiting for something. For a moment, neither of them spoke, but the air between them was thick with understanding. "I can't pretend to know what you've been through, Anna," Daniel said softly, "but I want to be here for you. I want to understand. And I don't know what this, whatever this is between us, will become. But I'm willing to find out. If you are." Anna met his gaze, her eyes reflecting the conflict and uncertainty that she had carried with her for so long. But then, slowly, she smiled, a small, quiet smile that spoke volumes. It was a smile of acceptance, of vulnerability, and maybe even of hope. "I'm willing to find out too," she said, her voice steady. And in that moment, Daniel realized that this strange, unexpected marriage had brought them both to a place where the only thing that mattered was the willingness to move forward together, without knowing exactly where the path would lead. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt a sense of peace. It wasn't about the mansion or the wealth. It was about this woman, this incredible, resilient woman, who had shown him that life was about much more than just survival. It was about choosing to live, and choosing to love. The days that followed the conversation were both challenging and transformative for Daniel. For the first time in his life, he felt the weight of responsibility not just as a businessman, but as a partner to someone who had been through far more than he could ever imagine. He had always thought of himself as a man who controlled his destiny, someone who could shape the future with the force of his will and resources. But Anna had brought a sense of humility into his life, a reminder that not everything could be controlled, that some aspects of life were simply beyond comprehension. The more Daniel observed Anna, the more he realized just how much of herself she had given up in her younger years. She had buried her dreams, sacrificed her happiness, and chosen a path that led her into a life of quiet endurance. Yet, despite everything she had been through, there was still an undeniable strength in her. It wasn't the kind of strength that came from wealth, social status, or achievement. It was a quiet, internal fortitude that allowed her to persevere even in the face of overwhelming hardship. It was the kind of strength that made Daniel wonder if he had truly been living up to his potential. As they spent more time together, Daniel began to understand what Anna had meant when she said that she had wanted to feel something different. She hadn't been looking for luxury or status, she had been looking for a chance to feel alive, to make a decision for herself, to take control of her own life. The decision to marry him had been her way of stepping into a new reality, of embracing a possibility that was completely outside the world she had known. It wasn't about him, not really. It was about her desire to feel something more, something that had been missing for so long. But despite the growing bond between them, Daniel couldn't ignore the nagging sense of doubt that lingered in the back of his mind. He knew that Anna's past wasn't as simple as she had made it out to be, and he had begun to wonder if there was more to her story that she was keeping hidden. There were moments when he would catch her lost in thought, her eyes clouded with something darker than the usual calmness that defined her. It was in these moments that Daniel knew there was still so much more to learn about her, so many things she had yet to share. One rainy afternoon, Daniel returned home early from a business meeting, hoping to surprise Anna with a quiet evening. He was determined to make things right, to show her that he was willing to embrace the life she wanted, even if it meant stepping outside of his comfort zone. But as he entered the house, he found it eerily quiet. There were no sounds of the television, no soft music playing in the background, just silence. He called out for Anna, but there was no answer. He checked the living room, the kitchen, and even the study, but she wasn't there. A sudden sense of unease crept over him as he made his way upstairs, his footsteps echoing through the empty halls. It wasn't until he reached the small library that he found her. Anna was sitting in the corner by the window, the rain streaking down the glass as she stared out into the storm. She looked peaceful, but there was a weight in her posture that made Daniel's heart sink. For a moment, he simply watched her, unsure of how to approach the situation. Something was different about her today, something was off. As he stepped closer, Anna turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "I didn't expect you home so early," she said quietly, but there was a tension in her voice that Daniel couldn't ignore. She looked away quickly, almost as if she were hiding something. "Anna, what's going on?" Daniel asked gently, his voice filled with concern. "You've been distant lately. I know you've been through a lot, but if there's something you need to talk about, I'm here. You don't have to hide from me." For a long moment, Anna didn't answer. She simply sat there, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Daniel's mind raced as he wondered if he had crossed a line, if he was asking too much too soon. But then, just as he was about to retreat, Anna spoke. "There's something I haven't told you," she began, her voice shaky. "Something I never planned on sharing, but I think you need to know. You deserve to know." Daniel's heart skipped a beat, and he took a step closer, his gaze fixed on her. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for, the moment that would reveal the missing piece of the puzzle. He sat down beside her, his presence steady and calm, as if to give her the space she needed to speak. "When I was 18, Anna continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was in a terrible relationship. I was young, naive, and looking for something that felt real. But the man I was with wasn't who he said he was. He was abusive, Daniel. In ways I never could have imagined. At first, I thought it was normal. He said he loved me, but his love was controlling, suffocating. He would tell me what to wear, who I could talk to, where I could go. And then, one day, it escalated." Daniel sat frozen, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. He had suspected that there was more to Anna's story, but nothing could have prepared him for the depth of pain she had endured. It was hard to imagine the Anna sitting next to him, the calm, collected woman he had come to know, having lived through such horrors. He reached for her hand, a silent gesture of support, as she continued to speak. "It started with verbal abuse," Anna said, her eyes distant as she relived the memories. "He would call me names, belittle me, make me feel worthless. And then one day, he hit me. It wasn't just once, either. It happened more times than I care to count. Each time, he would apologize, tell me he was sorry, and I would forgive him. I convinced myself that it was my fault, that I wasn't good enough for him. But deep down, I knew I couldn't keep living like that. I knew I had to get out." Daniel felt a surge of anger at the thought of someone treating Anna in such a cruel, unforgivable way. He wanted to lash out, to find this man make him feel the same pain he had caused Anna. But he knew that this wasn't about him, it was about Anna, and the strength it had taken for her to walk away from a toxic relationship. "I left him when I was 20, Anna continued, her voice trembling. "I found the courage to escape, to start over. But the damage had been done. I've spent years trying to heal from it, trying to convince myself that I was worth something, that I deserved better. But even now, I still carry the scars, inside and out." Daniel squeezed her hand gently, his heart aching for her. This was the Anna he had been searching for, the woman who had suffered, who had fought to survive, and who had ultimately found the strength to move forward. And yet, despite everything she had been through, she had never allowed herself to be broken. "I never told you because I didn't want you to pity me," Anna whispered, her voice small. "I didn't want you to see me as weak or damaged. I wanted to be the woman you thought I was, the woman you could rely on. But I realize now that I can't keep hiding from you. I can't keep pretending that everything's okay when it's not." Daniel's heart swelled with admiration for her. In that moment, he understood just how strong Anna truly was, not because she had survived her past, but because she had allowed herself to be vulnerable with him. She had opened up, shared her deepest pain, and trusted him enough to let him in. And he knew, without a doubt, that he would never take her strength for granted. "I'm not going anywhere, Anna," he said softly, his voice full of promise. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore. I'm here for you, no matter what." Tears filled Anna's eyes as she looked at him, and for the first time, Daniel saw her as she truly was, raw, unguarded, and beautiful in her vulnerability. She leaned into him, and he wrapped his arms around her, holding her as she let out the pain she had carried for so long. In that embrace, Daniel realized that their marriage, born of a dare, had turned into something much more powerful than he could have ever anticipated. It wasn't about the wealth, the luxury, or the status. It was about two people, flawed and imperfect, choosing to face their pasts together and build something real. And as the rain continued to pour outside, Daniel knew that, no matter what the future held, they would face it side by side, ready to overcome whatever challenges came their way. The days that followed Daniel and Anna's heart-to-heart conversation were filled with both healing and uncertainty. Daniel found himself contemplating what Anna had shared with him, the pain she had endured and the courage she had shown in walking away from a destructive past. He had never fully understood the weight of emotional trauma until now. The world he had grown accustomed to, one of wealth, control, and success, suddenly seemed distant and shallow compared to the depth of Anna's experience. He realized that, for all his wealth and accomplishments, he had never truly known what it meant to fight for one's life and happiness. But now, with Anna by his side, he understood that strength wasn't just about financial prowess or outward achievements, it was about resilience, about choosing to rise above the darkest moments of life. But with this newfound understanding came a deeper sense of responsibility. Daniel knew that he couldn't just be a passive observer in Anna's journey to healing. He had to be an active partner, someone who would not only stand by her side but also support her as she faced the lingering shadows of her past. Anna had come so far, but there was still work to be done, still parts of her that needed to be embraced and nurtured. He knew that he couldn't rush this process, and yet, the need to protect her and shield her from further harm burned within him. But Daniel also knew that true healing required trust, and trust couldn't be forced. It had to be earned, step by step. The couple spent more time together in the following weeks, working to understand each other more deeply. Their conversations became less about the past and more about the future, about their dreams, their hopes, and the life they could build together. Anna started to open up more about the things she wanted from life, things that had once seemed impossible, like traveling, pursuing creative endeavors, or simply living in a place where she felt free to be herself. These were things that Daniel, in his wealth and privilege, had never had to think twice about. But for Anna, they were luxuries she had never imagined, let alone experienced. One afternoon, as they sat in their sunroom overlooking the sprawling garden, Anna turned to Daniel, her expression pensive. "Daniel, do you ever feel like life has just happened to you?" she asked, her voice soft yet filled with an unspoken weight. Daniel looked at her, sensing the depth of her question. "What do you mean?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Like, we all get caught up in this race, this idea of what we should be doing, what we should have. But sometimes, I wonder if anyone ever stops to think about what they really want, deep down. You know, what makes them feel alive. Not just the things we're supposed to do, but the things we actually desire." Anna paused, her eyes focused on a distant point in the garden, as if seeking an answer in the natural world outside. "For years, I did what I thought I had to do to survive. I got by, day by day. But now, I want to do something that actually brings me joy, that fulfills me. Something that makes me feel like I'm not just drifting along. Daniel's heart tightened as he listened. He understood now that Anna's desires weren't about extravagant dreams or material things, they were about a deeper longing to reconnect with herself, to rediscover who she was beneath the layers of survival and sacrifice. And suddenly, Daniel found himself questioning his own life choices. How many times had he pushed himself to achieve more, to climb higher, without ever stopping to ask if he was truly living in alignment with his own passions and values? The realization hit him hard. Like Anna, he had spent so much of his life doing what was expected of him, pursuing success, building his empire, living up to the image of the man everyone thought he should be. But in the process, he had lost sight of the simple joys that once brought him happiness, the things he loved before his life became a cycle of meetings, business deals, and public appearances. It was as though he had become so consumed by the idea of success that he had forgotten what it felt like to truly live. Over the next few weeks, Daniel and Anna began to make small changes in their lives. They started by taking weekends away from their hectic schedules, exploring new cities, and engaging in activities they had never had the time to enjoy. They went hiking, took cooking classes, and even began to experiment with photography, something Daniel had always enjoyed but had neglected for years. Anna, in turn, began to indulge in her own passions. She picked up a paintbrush for the first time in years, rediscovered her love for writing, and began to immerse herself in books and ideas she had long forgotten. Slowly, their lives began to shift from one of routine and expectation to one of creativity, exploration, and connection. But even as they began to rebuild their lives, the shadows of Anna's past still lingered, occasionally resurfacing in quiet moments of doubt or fear. Anna had moments of vulnerability, times when her trauma would resurface unexpectedly. During these times, Daniel learned to be patient, to give her the space she needed without pushing her to move on or get over it. He understood now that healing was not a linear process, but rather a complex journey with peaks and valleys. There were days when Anna would retreat inward, when her mind would replay the painful memories of her past. But with Daniel by her side, she had learned to face those moments head-on, to process them with grace and resilience. However, as time went on, the relationship began to reveal unexpected challenges. Though they had both come a long way in their healing journeys, there was a growing tension between them, one that neither of them had anticipated. It wasn't the result of any one thing, but rather a gradual shift, an underlying current of dissatisfaction that neither could ignore. For all the growth they had experienced together, there was an unspoken distance beginning to form. Daniel's business ventures were taking up more of his time, and Anna, once content with the quiet, more domestic life they had built, began to feel a restlessness she couldn't shake. She began to wonder if they were truly compatible or if their relationship had merely been built on the shared experience of healing from the past. One evening, as they sat in the kitchen after dinner, Daniel noticed that Anna seemed lost in thought. Her eyes were distant, and she wasn't participating in their usual conversation about their day. There was a palpable silence between them, one that felt heavier than usual. "Anna, is something wrong?" Daniel asked, his voice gentle, though his heart was beginning to race. He sensed that something was amiss. Anna sighed, placing her fork down on her plate. I think I need some time to think about where we're heading," she said softly. "I love you, Daniel. I do. But sometimes, I wonder if I've been moving forward with you because it feels safer than facing the unknown on my own." Daniel felt his chest tighten. He had suspected this for some time, but hearing it out loud left him reeling. "Are you saying you don't want to be with me?" His voice cracked with emotion, though he tried to keep it steady. "I don't know," Anna whispered, her voice shaky. "I just need time to figure out who I am outside of us, outside of this life we've built. I'm not saying I want to leave you. But I need space to discover what I truly want in life, apart from the healing and the survival. The words hit Daniel like a ton of bricks. The thought of losing Anna, of seeing her walk away from everything they had built together, was more than he could bear. But deep down, he knew that this was a conversation that needed to happen, one that neither of them could avoid any longer. Anna wasn't the same person she had been when they first met, and neither was he. They had both changed in profound ways, and now they had to navigate what that meant for their future. Over the following weeks, they gave each other the space they needed, though it wasn't easy. The tension between them hung in the air, and both of them felt the weight of uncertainty. But it was in these moments of doubt and reflection that they each began to understand something crucial about themselves, about the importance of self-identity and personal growth, both as individuals and as partners. Daniel realized that he had to let go of the idea that his wealth and success were the key to everything. He needed to understand that true fulfillment came not from what he had achieved, but from the relationships he cultivated and the connections he made with those he loved. Anna, too, recognized that her journey was far from over. She wasn't just recovering from her past, she was discovering a new version of herself, one that didn't rely on her past pain or her past choices. It was a process of self-discovery, and it was one she needed to navigate on her own terms. And so, in the silence of their separate spaces, both Daniel and Anna began the slow and challenging work of finding themselves, of letting go of old patterns and expectations, and of embracing the future with hope and uncertainty. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments of doubt and fear. But both knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, whether it was apart or as a couple. Because, after all, they had already learned the most valuable lesson of all: life wasn't about being perfect or having everything figured out. It was about the courage to live authentically and to love fully, no matter where the journey took them.